Welcome to Decoding Grief with Andrew and Gary, where we explore the complex and often messy journey of grief, highlighting the different ways in which individuals experience and process grief. So let's get started.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Decoding Grief with Andrew and Gary. My name is Andrew, and my co-host here is Gary, and we do this podcast to talk about grief and the messiness afterwards of grief in your life, in your family's life, in your friends' lives, and how that affects you, but also the sharing process was huge in our lives to share things and share stories about grief. It helped us so much. And we thought that this podcast can help others do that, listen to others through their grief. But today's episode might be a little different than a conversation we've had before. When you think about grief, I'm sure everyone thinks about is death. If there's a death in the family or a friend, a mother, father, that's when you kind of think about how grief affects you. But in many other ways, like divorce and loss of a job, grief can be absolutely happening in your life. And Gary, the co-host today, is going to talk a little bit about grief in his life that kind of had nothing to do with a loss. I mean, no death or anything like that, but in a lawsuit. So, Gary, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be really brief about it.
Yeah.
And so just to give folks some frame of reference about it. So it was a lawsuit. I'm not used to being in that environment. I'd never had that really before. I had an insurance issue one time way back many, many years ago, but this was this lawsuit that isn't current, but that happened. Um, it was troubling to me, and it's been settled and everything. And there were actually three that one was a federal one, and then subsequently there were two more that were done. And it was the when you really peel it back and look at it, and you say, well, I guess this was the way that the people that did this could get some confirmation about something that they needed. And so, that happened, and the all the particulars about it are not important. The important part is that it was very different for me. I've never had that before. Two, the people that were involved in it from the other side, some of them were friends, and um, and I was in a position where I was uh, I was a good target for what needed to be done, not for me personally, but just because of the position I held. And so that's what made it all very much a grief experience for me. And so I think what's important to talk about in this episode is what those feelings were, how, and I'll let you guide me through that.
Yeah.
But really what those feelings were like, how I worked through them, what things I ultimately did, other advice I got from other friends that are retired therapists and practicing therapists and and people who are not therapists, and how I went through that. And as you and I have talked before, we've each experienced the death of parents, and this is a different kind of grief, as you mentioned in the intro. So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and let you pose questions and now
Yeah. Yeah.
understand the background of this.
Yeah.
So
We always talk about kind of in grief. I know in our past episodes is, let's see how this kind of compares to the grief that, we've had with in death and stuff like that is, a common thread is, did you feel like an aloneness? Feel like I know Pastor Steve in our last episode was talking about kind of grief is you feel alone at times. Did you feel like that in those moments?
yeah, because when it happened was I had just moved to a new town. I didn't really know
Mm,
anybody. My support system was not there. It was in the middle of COVID, so making friends was not easy.
yeah,
And yeah, so there was a bit lonely, and you weren't able to go to networking events for business or anything because they weren't having them.
right.
And I couldn't even go to church really. Church was online. And
Yeah,
so any of the normal support mechanisms that we would have or that I would have were not available because
yeah,
of the pandemic. So,
yeah,
yeah. So there was a sense of loneliness and
yeah.
aloneness as well.
Did you feel like maybe because you hadn't gone through something like this, was it hard for you to reach out to individuals to like, hey, maybe someone else can help me with this? I know in my perspective would be like, I don't know anyone. I couldn't think of anyone on top of my head right now that I'd be like, oh, could help me through a lawsuit right now, or help me through what this was going to be. Because again, the aloneness, the fear of like, does this make me look bad, or is this something that someone else isn't going to be able to, like help me with?
Mhm.
How did you kind of navigate like, I need to reach out to someone. I need someone to give me some guidance. How did you kind of
Yeah,
help with
so
that?
I have some friends, as I mentioned earlier, who are either a retired therapist or therapists still practicing. And I reached out to them, and they knew me through one for almost 40 years, and another person had known me for about 7 years. And I was able to talk with each of them, and they both offered very, very similar positions and ideas about how I could work through this. And the one that I'd known less than the other one, both of these were women that had been in practice, as I said, and the one of them that I knew less, but knew more of the situation that I was caught in, and she was always telling me, "You call whenever you want to call."
Yeah.
And I will be available to you. And it's kind of funny. I didn't realize how much I had called her during the time, and these things have been over for years now,
Yeah. Yeah.
these events. But she said, "Do you know how many times you called me a day when this first happened?" And I said, "No, I don't remember," because you kind of go blank on all that. It's
Yeah.
too painful to remember the
Yeah.
dark times. And I just remember the impact. But I said, "No, I don't remember." And she said, "You called me at least 4 times a day."
Oh my.
And as I went back, right, and I'm thinking, well, this woman's a saint. And then I
Yeah.
went back and I thought, well, I guess I probably did because we go through the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief
Grief. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
David Kessler that they wrote on grief and grieving. They wrote a book about that. This one was
Yeah.
really, really helpful. And I think I would go through the denial. At first, I was in denial that it happened, and then I got angry, and then I tried to bargain, like, what if I hadn't gotten involved in these things? Would it be different? And you finally move towards some sort of acceptance. But the thing is that these stages of grief I learned that they were descriptive and not prescriptive.
Yeah.
And that means that, yeah, you're in denial. I can't believe this would happen to me. And then you get into the anger part, and then you work your way through. And then suddenly something will happen in your just day-to-day life that has nothing to do with any of those things. And
Yeah.
I would find myself back in the anger part or in the moving. I've moved and now I've skipped up to depression and I want to sleep all day. And I know that's bad for me and beyond a certain point, and I would end up calling her and say, "I'm really scared right now
Yeah.
and I don't know how these are going to work out." And it doesn't matter how many people tell you, none of it was true. And these are all just accusations and they have to be proven.
Right.
And that's how our system works. I get it. But it doesn't make it easier to navigate
No.
because we're humans and these feelings just keep coming up. And so I kept spinning in and out of these various stages of the grief process. And
Yeah.
I think that there, the one friend was really, really helpful because she would be there and she would be available and there was no judgment and
Hmm.
there was just questions and which great therapists do and questions and what do you think about this and how would you do this and didn't really tell me what to do, but her actions of just being available. And then I had other friends that I knew through an exercise program actually here in town, and we were doing men's exercise group. It's boot camp exercise meetings, and they were early in the morning. And a neighbor took me, and we were not because we were outside. We didn't have to worry about
Hmm.
COVID. And they would always at the end they had what they call a circle of trust, and I live in a Christian Bible Belt kind of region in the U.S. And so, but in the circle of trust, they knew of my issue and they
Hmm.
would always have a prayer for me at the end.
Yeah.
And a number of them would just call to check on me because
Yeah.
they knew that this was troubling. Some of them were attorneys as well, and they knew that this is, even though this probably wasn't going to go very far, it was still uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
And they knew what that pain felt like because they were in the legal profession, which I
Yeah.
was not.
Yeah.
So I think that to answer the question is yes, it was difficult to reach out at first to people, but I selected environments where I could drop the information.
Yeah.
And if somebody picked it up, great. What I did learn is if I don't share some little piece of it, it's not going to get picked up and no one's going to ask about it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
talk to me. If they don't know about it, they can't help me. So
Yeah.
I think that's what
Yeah.
I learned.
Yeah.
And I think I gave it a sniff test. I could tell
Yeah.
if if I let it out to someone and they backed off or recoiled or thought, oh, that's a lot, I don't want to get involved in that. You can tell.
Right.
And they don't want to ask anymore. They just go, oh, that's unfortunate. And they move
Yeah.
on to something
Yeah.
else. You
Yeah.
know, how about that football game last week? They don't want
Right.
to get into the mess of it.
Yeah.
So does that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my next question, which you kind of answered, which was, how do you answer the person who says, "Yeah, but Gary, I don't have that kind of person in my life that I think would know about lawsuits, or I think would be able to give me some advice in that kind of midst of the storm, or hey, I'm in the midst of the storm right now. Everything is falling apart to them, because that's what
Right,
we feel like in that sense kind of thing.
right.
And everything's falling apart. Like I think what you kind of just said, and maybe elaborate more on that, is being proactive and kind of dipping your feet into it a little bit of like asking people, how did you kind of know in that early conversation with someone that, hey, maybe this is someone I can, because to us it feels like a burden. It's like I don't want to give them my burden. So like maybe quickly, like how did you kind of know
You
who to
could
talk
tell,
to?
the
Yeah.
way I could tell that they would be supportive or at least interested is they would ask inquisitive questions.
Right.
They became very inquisitive about it. They didn't want to know necessarily all the gory details.
Yeah.
Although, because I couldn't help myself, I would sort of spew gory details about all of it.
Right. Yeah.
But in the process, they were at least interested in listening.
Yeah.
And they would often say things like, well, what do you think I should do about that? What's the value of, is worry going to solve anything?
Yeah.
What could you do about that? And I would respond. And I remember when I was going off, I've been an entrepreneur and I've had my own business for about 26 years. And I remember when I was just starting and I wanted to do it and I was stuck in corporate America, which is another whole grief episode
Yeah.
and trauma episode. And I remember him saying, tell people what you want and they will help you.
Yeah.
And that was a big lesson. I think that helped me a lot in the lawsuit situation is that if I don't tell people what I need, it's impossible for them to help me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And but by reaching out to them, they might say, "Hey, I have a friend who's an attorney. You should talk to him. Have
Hmm.
you talked to this guy in our exercise group who doesn't come all the time, but you know who he is? He's an attorney. He may be able to give you some insight." Or, "Hey, my father-in-law is a retired attorney and he was a litigator and he may be able to help you with this. He wasn't a corporate tax attorney. He
Yeah.
was actually a litigator and he may be able to give you some feedback." So those kind of things are helpful. Even if you don't have a friend, you
Right.
can at least someone that if you share this burden, they may be able to help you talk to somebody who does know that, or maybe you even ask that. Say,
Yeah.
do you know somebody that I could talk to? And I think also the another really important thing is to not be afraid to go to professional counselors and therapists.
Yeah.
Like you can look them up on the psychologytoday.com or something, and you can find somebody in your area and you can reach out and they don't have a horse in the race.
Right.
They're not passing judgment on you. They're paid, trained professionals to help you work through things if you don't want to burden your friends and family with these things.
Yeah.
Or if you feel like your family and your friends aren't really equipped to do this, or you sense that
Right.
they are, this is a bit icky for me. I don't want to be in
Yeah.
the middle of this.
Yeah. I think it's even easier now. It's not even that you have to go drive somewhere or go find someone in your community to go talk
Right,
to. Now they make those things so much easier. You can do therapy sessions online and like Zoom, like we're doing right now.
right,
You can
right.
do those kind of things. You can do it in an app. It makes it so much easier. And like like you're saying, sometimes just getting it out, just being able to share it to someone,
Yep.
just gives it less power. It's like, all right, finally I'm being able to talk about it. I'm being able to share about it.
I'm not
And
carrying it alone.
yeah,
Yeah, the burden's heavy.
and it's been common in our past episodes, in our talks, is community and reaching out to people and having that so you don't do it alone. And it's like, oh, we're in death, okay, everyone comes up to you and says, oh, I'm so sorry to hear this, or don't worry, we'll get better and stuff like that. But
Yep.
we don't think about, like, in lawsuits, in divorce, in
Losing
friendships,
a
and
job.
yeah, like all those kind of things. It's like, oh yeah, those are the same kind of things. Like we need community, and we need friends, and we need family just as much through
Yeah.
those moments, so that we don't have to carry that burden alone and stuff like that. And what this kind of started from, even doing these interviews, is talking to volunteers about grief. Like, everyone has a story. And again,
Mhm.
it might not be that you lost your parents, it might not be that you lost your father, but it might be this. And it's like, you know what? I don't relate to you losing your mom, but I do relate to the loss of a job, or my marriage breaking down and stuff like that. And I know the process of grief and the 5 stages and stuff like that. Like, there's people out there that carry the grief very well,
Mhm.
and you might not even know that your friend has gone through that. And so I know you had great about kind of seeping through the questions that people would ask you. I always talk about, after my mom died, there'd be like the BS questions that people would say, or the BS comments. It's like, oh, don't worry, we'll get better. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, that's the biggest misnomer. Oh,
Yeah,
time makes this get better.
time heals all wounds.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
this, don't worry, it will get better. Like, those are the people maybe you do not open up to and share a lot. Those are not the people that it's like, oh, they're not going to sit down with me and let me just unload, But
Yeah.
like Gary was saying, like, finding those people that ask questions, like, hey, tell me more about this. Like, I didn't know you were going through this. Like, tell me more about this. Are there people who are going to be like, hey, I'm here for you. Like, if you need to talk, if you just want me to listen, you don't want me to say anything and just listen to you, um, those are the people you got to find and kind of hold on to,
Yeah.
and reach
I
out
often
to.
ask
Yeah.
friends that when they'll call me and say they want to talk about something, and it's obviously some sort of traumatic event, at least in their minds.
Yeah.
And they'll say, I want to chat. And I go, well, do you want me to be in Gary listen mode or Gary
Mm-hmm.
fix mode? Which would
Right.
you like? And they'll say, oh, just Gary listen mode. So,
Yeah.
okay. And I wanted to share one other thing. This is from years and years ago, but had a friend who was, she's probably pretty old now, I think, but like maybe in her 80s, 90s, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I remember her sharing a story with me. She had lost an adult child who was in his early 20s. And she had 2 children, but the older one had passed. And she told me a story about going in the grocery store, and someone who was a friend of hers in the grocery store saw her and said, oh, I haven't seen you in the store for a while. And she said, yeah. She said, we lost our son, and
Mm.
to cancer, I believe. And
Yeah.
she said, we lost our son, blah, 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 blah. And this other woman said, oh, I know how you must feel.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend said to her, have you ever lost a child? And the woman said, oh no. And then she
Yeah.
boldly said, then you have no idea how I feel.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, what a lesson for me to
Mm-hmm.
when someone is sharing their episode with me, is that it has nothing to do with me playing one-upsmanship on them, or I know how this must feel, because you know what? I have no idea how it must feel. Even
Right.
if someone came to me in my same situation and said, yeah, man, I just got named in a lawsuit, and blah 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 blah. It is not my place to say, "Oh, I know how you must feel."
Right.
It's probably good for me to say, "Wow, if you want to tell me about it, tell me about it. I have some experience with that,
Right.
and at some point I'm happy to share that with you. But right now, I'd like you to feel comfortable sharing with me what you feel you need to share, and
Right.
for me just to be here and listen to you."
Right.
And so I think there's a lesson for in this podcast, even not just for the people who are experiencing the trauma and the grief episode,
Right.
but the people that they go to share their information, that we have a role as the recipients to allow them the space to say what they need to say. And
Right.
I think there are times when people need to feel safe that they can cry, that
Yeah.
they can really have grieving while they're talking to you, and that we don't run away as the
Right.
recipients. We just sit, and I've had that happen before where people have done that, and I will say to them when they're doing that, I usually just grab the Kleenex box and hand it to them, and then I'll ask, how would you like me to be with you? Like,
Right.
how can I be helpful in this thing? And they'll often say, I just want to be able to be here safe where no one else is here and just you're here with me. I go,
Absolutely.
okay, we can do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to just to see from the other side as well,
Yeah.
how we should
Absolutely.
behave when
Yeah.
others come to us.
Yeah. I think so. I think in conclusion, what a question I have for you is, what would you tell Gary the moment he got like the lawsuit handed to him? What would you tell that person now? Um,
Well, the first
to,
thing that my
yeah.
attorney told me when the lawsuit came down, he said, number one thing, and I think this was great advice. He said, it's a civil matter. You're not going to jail tomorrow night.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay. He
Yeah.
goes, this is a tool that's used it to clarify situations,
Right.
and it's part of our system. So you're not going to jail.
Right.
So don't freak out, you know.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and I remember I told a junior attorney that worked with him on this case, and I said, I was talking to him by himself one time, and I said, you know, Steve says that he says, don't freak out. I'll tell you when it's time to freak out.
Yeah.
And the junior attorney said, yeah, I've heard Steve say that to other people. And guess what? He's never told them it was time to freak out.
Oh.
So I think the freak out part is our reaction, obviously.
Right.
But what I learned was when these kind of things happen, they happen. And if we can get past getting emotionally hijacked,
Yeah.
we get amped up at first and then start to sit down and go, okay, if you got to go run around the block, if you got to go do a workout, if you got to go play your musical instrument, if you got
Hmm.
to take a pillow and punch it a few times, whatever you got to do,
Yeah.
that's not going to hurt anybody else, then just, get yourself
Yeah.
through it and
Yeah.
then really sit down and look at what is really going on and what are my options for how to respond to this.
Right.
And I have legal help that's going to help me walk through this as uncomfortable as it is.
Yeah.
So that was the nuts and bolts of what created the process, the grief episode, if you will, and then how I walked through it.
Yeah. So Gary, just thanks for sharing that. I know again, this is a podcast that we want to share these kind of stories with you guys, to hope that you learn something from this, and maybe you're not going through the exact thing that Gary's going through, or the stuff that I have gone through, or death and stuff like that. But maybe this is just helping you be that really good friend
Mhm.
for you and for someone else that is going through this, that you can be there for them and help them and stuff like that. So we want you guys, as always, to like comment down below, if there's stories you want to talk about, or issues that you're having, or questions you just want us to answer, and with us and with our experts that we have to come on, we want to do that. We want to be able to talk more about different episodes of grief and the effects of that. So thank you guys for watching. But as always, how we finish, and again, is a common topic today, was we always say you're never alone. So always reach out, always talk to people. If someone's hurting, reach out to them. They could pretty much really use it. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll be back soon. So thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Andrew.